He watched me sleep in the stairwell and walked right past. That moment stayed burned into my brain. The man I once loved stepping over my legs like I was nothing more than litter on the floor. I had been evicted that afternoon, carrying everything I owned in 2 torn bags, and I hadn't eaten in 2 days. My body was shaking, my pride long gone. I called his name once, just once, barely above a whisper. Sean didn't even turn around. I used to think love meant sacrifice. I gave up everything for him, my job, my apartment, even my friendships. When his startup almost collapsed, I was the one who dipped into my savings to help him stay afloat. When he needed someone to rehearse his investor pitches with, I stayed up till dawn coaching him. And when he cried the night his parents disowned him, I was the one who held his face in my hands and told him he still mattered. But the moment I needed him, the moment I asked for something as small as a place to sleep, he let me rot on a concrete staircase in the middle of February. Because Marcia had walked into his life by then. Beautiful, graceful Marcia, whose heels never scuffed, whose perfume always lingered in rooms long after she'd left. I didn't even hate her. How could I? She hadn't promised me anything. Sean had. It was Clifford's apartment complex. That's what made it worse. Clifford knew me too. He knew what Sean and I had been. But still, the next morning, when I asked to speak to Sean again, he told me I wasn't on the guest list. I don't remember how long I wandered after that. Hunger and humiliation make the days blur together. When the fever came, I lay down on the steps outside the only church I ever trusted and waited for the cold to take me. I didn't pray. I didn't cry. I just closed my eyes and let the world disappear. And then I woke up. 3 years earlier, in my old apartment. In my old life. Back before I lost everything for a man who would have let me die. This time, I wasn't going to beg. This time, I was going to own the building. My name is Carmen, and before I was his landlord, I was his shadow. Sean was the kind of man people assumed would succeed. The type who walked into a room and didn't have to ask for attention. He already had it. Calm, confident, always a few steps ahead. And I was the girl who used to walk 2 steps behind, happy just to be near him. We met when he was still a struggling entrepreneur working part-time in a dusty co-working space. I was renting a small apartment nearby, juggling 2 jobs and tutoring high school kids just to cover rent. Our first conversation wasn't magical, it was practical. He needed someone to help write the technical copy for a pitch deck, and I needed the extra cash. But somehow our conversation stretched beyond work. He told me about his dreams, the app he wanted to build, the childhood he'd buried under ambition. And I listened like his voice was the only sound worth hearing. He wasn't rich then, wasn't famous. And that's when I loved him the most. Sean moved in with me 6 months later when his landlord hiked the rent. I didn't hesitate. Of course, I'd said, brushing off his protests. It's not like I'm sharing my palace. It wasn't a palace. It was a cramped studio with creaky pipes and a window that wouldn't shut all the way. But with him there, it felt warmer, lighter, like maybe I wasn't just surviving anymore. He worked late most nights. I'd fall asleep to the sound of his fingers tapping away at his keyboard, only to wake up and find him scribbling code on napkins and Post-its. I brought him coffee. I proofread his proposals. When his pitch got rejected, I told him he was ahead of his time. And when it finally got accepted, I was the first person he hugged, lifting me off the ground in our tiny kitchen, laughing like he was invincible. I should have known that kind of laugh doesn't last. The more Sean rose, the more invisible I became. It started small, him forgetting to mention me in interviews, not introducing me to investors, brushing off my hand in public. He said he just didn't want to mix things. Business was business, and we were private. But I saw the shift. I felt it every time Marcia appeared. She was always polite, always composed. She'd compliment my outfit with a smile that never quite reached her eyes. But her eyes were always on Sean. And Sean? He stopped coming home for dinner. Clifford, Sean's closest investor and longtime friend, introduced him to Marcia formally during a launch event. She was everything I wasn't. Soft-spoken, well-dressed, from a family with real estate portfolios, and old money. I was the woman who split bills with him and packed his lunch in Tupperware. I didn't realize how far I'd fallen from his world until the eviction notice arrived. He knew I had lost my job. He knew my contract had been unfairly terminated because I'd called out a superior who was plagiarizing Sean's early code. And still, when I called him in, tears telling him I had nowhere to go, he just said, "Carmen, I'm with people right now. Can we talk later?" There was no later. The next time I saw him, I was curled up in the stairwell of Clifford's building. My cheeks were raw from the wind. I hadn't eaten in 36 hours. And when he passed by with Marcia on his arm, he didn't stop. He didn't blink. He didn't even acknowledge me. That's when I understood what I was to him. Not a partner, not a person, just a stepping stone. I lost everything because of Sean. But I didn't hate him then. I hated myself. Hated the way I had begged. The way I had lowered my head and whispered, "Please." The way I had convinced myself love meant giving until there was nothing left. I died on a cold February night. At least the version of me who loved Sean did. When I opened my eyes in the past, I sat in silence for nearly an hour. My hands trembled as I touched the cheap cotton blanket I remembered hating at the time. The water stains on the wall, the same broken remote, the same noise from the neighbors arguing through the paper-thin walls. I was back. 3 years back. The timing couldn't have been more poetic. Sean hadn't made it yet. He was still looking. For seed funding, still halfway between brilliance and burnout. And Marcia? She hadn't even entered the picture. I stared at my old phone for a long time. He hadn't messaged yet, but I knew the text would come soon. He'd ask me to look over his deck again. He'd suggest coffee under the guise of friendship, then slowly inch into my life, borrowing my space, my money, my time, until I was so entangled I couldn't pull myself free without breaking. But this time, I wouldn't respond, because this time, I was going to buy the building Clifford's family would eventually sell. This time, I wasn't going to be the girl outside in the cold. I was going to be the one who held the keys. The first time I saw Sean again in this life, it was almost comical. He was standing in front of the same corner cafe, arguing with the barista over a payment error. His card had been declined. I stood across the street watching him fumble through his backpack for cash. In that moment, he wasn't the powerful CEO I'd watched betray me in the future. He was just a young man with tired eyes and too much pride. I didn't feel anger. Not yet, just distance. Like I was staring at someone else's faded memory. Back then, we hadn't met officially. Not yet. But I remembered when we did. It was supposed to be at a tech networking night the following week. In my old life, I'd shown up late, spilled wine on his shoes, and laughed nervously as he offered me napkins. I still had the shoes I wore that night tucked in a box somewhere, heels with worn-down soles, the kind I could never walk confidently in. This time, I didn't go to that event. Instead, I bought out a decaying multi-unit building that was about to go into foreclosure. It took every connection I had from my past life, every strategy I remembered failing and learned to correct. And it worked. By the time Sean started looking for cheaper office space for his brilliant new startup, I had already renovated half the units, turning the ground floor into a co-working space. The name on the leasing contract he signed? C. Alvarez Holdings. He never made the connection, not until the day the elevator broke and I stepped out of the technician's office wearing a clipboard and a smirk. His face froze. "Carmen?" He blinked, caught between confusion and something that looked like guilt. "Sean," I said simply, glancing at the clipboard. "Looks like Unit 305's rent is a day late. Want me to waive the late fee?" He opened his mouth to speak, but I didn't wait for his answer. I walked away. It was petty. A small flick of power. But the shift was real. This time, I was the one, watching him squirm. But that didn't mean the past disappeared. Seeing him again stirred 1,000 fragments of a broken story I never wanted to reread. The nights I waited for him to come home, the moments I excused his coldness, the time he told me flatly, "Maybe I just don't love you anymore." And yet now he followed me. Into elevators, down hallways, leaving notes with vague invitations. "You're different these days. I'd like to talk." No, this wasn't about talking. This was about remembering, because I remembered the worst part. It wasn't the night he stepped over me as I slept outside Clifford's complex. It wasn't even the cold silence after I called him from the hospital, coughing into a mask, begging him to just answer. It was what came after. He had used my story. Months later, I saw a feature interview on a tech blog. Sean was the golden boy. The headline read, "From couch hopping to corporate titan, how one founder rose from nothing." He told a story about the hardship of almost losing his apartment, how he had once slept in stairwells and refused to let failure define him. He had turned my downfall into his triumph. He made my pain his PR. So no, I didn't want to talk. I wanted him to feel what it meant to lose something you never thought could disappear. But just when I thought I had locked the past neatly away, the betrayal began again, this time from a different angle. Clifford showed up at my office. He was sharper in this life, younger, more ambitious. Still dressed in those painfully tailored suits and expensive watches he always used to flaunt. But this time, he didn't come as Sean's best friend. He came as my business rival. He had started his own investment firm and was eyeing the adjacent property for a major project. "You've done well," he said smoothly, crossing his legs in the guest chair of my office. "I underestimated you, Carmen." I said nothing, waiting for the punchline. He didn't disappoint. "But you know," he continued, "Sean's still struggling, still chasing capital. He's not built for it like you are. Maybe you could help him." "Help him?" I repeated, arching an eyebrow. Clifford shrugged. "You were always his foundation, weren't you?" That's when it clicked. Clifford was trying to use me again, just like before. In the past, he'd always hinted, subtly, that Sean did better when I was around, that my presence kept him grounded, that maybe my loyalty was my greatest contribution. But I knew the truth now. Loyalty meant nothing to men who only valued leverage. And Sean? He didn't want me. He wanted my stability, my knowledge, my name on the lease that gave him credibility. And as Clifford leaned in closer, dropping his voice just enough to make it feel like a game, he added, "Look, Marcia's coming back from Paris soon. She's still fond of Sean, but you've got the empire now. It'd be a shame not to share it with the man you once believed in." My smile didn't reach my eyes, so he gets the company. "And she gets the man?" I said, my voice calm. Clifford laughed. "You always were the smart one." I stood up slowly, walked to the door, and held it open. "I don't share property," I said evenly. "Not anymore." Carmen sat alone in her office long after Clifford left, the quiet clicking of the clock on the wall somehow louder than the city traffic outside. She had expected this, people circling back the moment they smelled power. But she hadn't expected the heaviness in her chest, the ache that started not in her heart, but in her gut. The kind of ache that comes when you're being pulled between the past and the present, between who you were and who you're trying to be. She clenched her jaw, forcing her fingers to stop trembling. The image of Sean stepping over her outside that apartment had been buried deep, but Clifford's voice, Marcia's name, had unearthed it like a body from a shallow grave. She didn't cry. She didn't have time for that anymore, but inside she could feel something unraveling. What was it that made her so furious? The betrayal? The humiliation? Or the fact that after everything, even in this new timeline, part of her still reacted? To him, still noticed the way he looked at her now, with something like regret in his eyes? Regret wasn't redemption. She remembered the hospital, the second time she had collapsed from hunger. The memory of calling Sean from the ER, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, I don't have anyone else." And his reply, flat and cold. "You should call someone who cares." That version of her had died that night. This version had clawed her way back with bloodied hands. And yet, she hated that her heart still cracked a little whenever she saw his name in the tenant list. There was no logic to it, no sense. She had rebuilt herself from the ground up, reclaimed every ounce of her dignity, and turned her pain into steal. But emotion doesn't follow logic. And love, even when buried alive, sometimes refuses to die. That terrified her, more than Sean, more than Marcia. She feared herself, feared that some small part of her still wanted to ask, why? Why did he choose her over me? Why wasn't I enough? And yet, even as those questions clawed at her, Carmen reminded herself what had changed. She had power now, he had needs, and there would be no more giving without consequence. That night, she found herself walking the hallways of the building she now owned, remembering the times she used to stand outside his door with takeout bags and hope. Now she passed his door without pause, without knocking, but her heart didn't follow. It lagged behind, dragging memories she didn't ask to relive. She stopped in front of the stairwell, that stairwell, the same one she had collapsed in during her darkest winter. The one where she had clutched her knees, numb, as people stepped around her like a discarded bag. Sean had been the last one to pass that night, and she had watched his back disappear up the stairs, waiting for him to stop, to turn, to offer her even one word. He hadn't, and she had still loved him. God, she had still loved him. Carmen swallowed the burn rising in her throat. She wasn't that girl anymore. She wouldn't be her again. But the memory stayed. The ache stayed. And the fear of trusting, of feeling, of letting someone close again, felt like a prison. Because if she was honest, it wasn't just Sean. She didn't forgive, it was herself, for loving him more than she loved her own safety. For believing in a man who would leave her in the cold and then use her suffering as his success story. She closed her eyes and whispered quietly to the empty hallway. Never again. Her phone buzzed in her pocket. A message from the property assistant. Sean just submitted a maintenance request. Wants to meet you about a potential business pitch? Of course. He always came back when he needed something. She stared at the screen, her heart beating in sharp, clipped rhythms. She could ignore it. Walk away. Leave him hanging the way he had once. Left her. But something inside her shifted. If this was going to end, it wouldn't be with silence. It would be with clarity and control. Carmen straightened, slipping her phone back into her pocket, her steps echoing through the building she now ruled. Let him come. Let him pitch. Let him talk. And when he did, she would remind him, with calm, cold words, exactly who held the lease now. Carmen hadn't expected Sean to bring Marcia with him. She entered the meeting room first, crisp and polished, a silk blouse tucked into high-waisted cream trousers, a soft gold chain resting at her collarbone. Sean followed her like an afterthought. Carmen's fingers curled slightly against the glass table, but she didn't move. Thank you. You for making time, Sean began, eyes searching her face. I know things between us. I didn't agree to this for apologies, she interrupted coolly. Let's talk business. He hesitated, then nodded. Marcia sat without being invited, crossing her legs like she owned the room. It's actually a joint pitch, she said smoothly. A new venture. We're seeking investment and possibly strategic space. Your space. Carmen raised an eyebrow. So you need capital and office space? Sean cleared his throat. It's a wellness startup, app-based, but with physical hubs. Therapy, meditation, trauma recovery. The words hit like an insult. Trauma recovery? From the two people who had once left her outside to freeze? Carmen tilted her head. Tell me. What? Do you know about trauma? Marcia smiled, unfazed. We've both had our share of setbacks. Sean glanced at Carmen again. She knew that look. It was the one he used to give when he was trying to manipulate without being obvious. He thought a softened gaze would make her forget. She kept her voice steady. Do you want my property or my name on your brochure? Neither of them answered. That's when Carmen opened the folder sitting on the table in front of her. She turned it around and slid it across the table slowly. Inside were printed screenshots, messages, time-stamped transfers. Marcia's lips parted before she could stop herself. "These," Carmen said calmly, "are proof that Marcia rerouted part of your early seed funding into a luxury goods reseller account under her sister's name. That would have been right before you failed to pay your development team, correct?" Sean's face drained of color. "I didn't steal," Marcia started. Carmen cut her off. "I didn't say you did, but the documentation is thorough and admissible." Sean looked between them, stunned. "You've been investigating her?" Carmen smiled faintly. "You don't think I buy buildings without researching everyone inside them, do you?" Then, quietly, sharper than any shout, she added, "You chose her over me once. Let's see how that works out for you again." Marcia stood, snatching her bag. "Come on, Sean. She's just trying to scare you." But he didn't move, and that hesitation told Carmen everything. He was finally realizing the cost. Carmen didn't expect him to come back that night, but he did. Sean stood in the hallway, outside her office as if it took everything in him just to knock. His blazer was damp from the light rain outside, his hair slightly disheveled, and for once, he wasn't rehearsed. He looked like a man who had finally run out of stories to tell. "I need to talk to you," he said. Carmen didn't say a word. She turned and walked back into her office, leaving the door open just long enough for him to follow. He did. She sat behind her desk, calm and unreadable. He didn't. He stayed standing. "You knew," he began quietly. "This whole time, you knew what Marcia was doing." Carmen's eyes didn't flicker. "Not the whole time. Just long enough." He walked slowly to the window and stared out, at the city below. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "You didn't want to listen," she replied. "Not then, not when it would have mattered. And now? Now it's just entertainment." Sean turned back to her, his voice tense. "It's not entertainment to me." Carmen's smile was thin. "Then you should have picked a different leading actress." That silenced him. He walked toward the desk but stopped a few feet short. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here because I remembered something today." She said nothing, but he took that as permission. "Back then, during the early days," he said, "I used to come home to you, tired, frustrated. Sometimes I'd lose hope. You'd always have something ready, tea, a plan, a sentence that would make it all feel possible again. But I never told you how much I depended on you." Carmen looked at him, her expression unreadable. "You didn't have to tell me, I already knew." He frowned. "Then why didn't you stay?" Her tone was sharp, immediate. "You let me sleep outside your building, Sean. You stepped over me." She rose slowly from her chair, her voice low but shaking with restrained fury. "You knew what I was going through. You knew I had nothing, and you pretended I didn't exist. Why should I have stayed after that?" Sean looked like he'd been slapped. "I didn't know how bad it was." "You didn't care how bad it was," she snapped. "You cared about image. You cared about investors. You cared about Marcia and what she could give you. I was never enough. Not glamorous, not connected, not useful anymore." She turned away, pacing. "You talked about building a future, and then you erased me from yours the second it got inconvenient." Sean's voice cracked. "That's not true." "It is," she said, her back still turned. "And the worst part is I forgave you for it. In that life, I died loving you, even after everything. But now I get to stand here, look you in the eye, and feel nothing but disgust." He was silent. For the first time, completely quiet. She faced him again. "So, if you came here for forgiveness, you won't get it. If you came here for a second chance, you're 3 years too late." He swallowed hard, pain settling deep into his features. "Then why did you help me get that lease? Why let me back in?" Carmen's eyes softened, but only slightly. "Because I wanted to see what you'd do when the roles were reversed." Sean's shoulders slumped. "And what did you see?" She hesitated, then answered. I saw a man who doesn't recognize the damage he causes until it's staring him in the face. There was silence. Then softly he asked, "Do you hate me?" "No," she replied, voice cold. "I outgrew you. There's a difference." He closed his eyes, briefly, as if those words hit harder than hatred. "I deserve that," he murmured. "All of it." She didn't answer. He stepped closer to the desk, desperation flickering in his eyes. "You were the best thing in my life, Carmen. I just didn't know it until I lost you." Her gaze didn't soften. "That's the tragedy of men like you," she said quietly. "You only learn love through absence, and by the time you do, you've burned the bridge you're trying to cross." Sean let out a breath, his voice barely audible now. "I don't know how to fix it." "You can't." A pause. And then, slowly, Carmen moved to the window and stared out at the lights blinking across the skyline. "Do you know why I started buying buildings?" she asked, her tone calm. Sean shook his head silently. "Because I wanted to own every place that once made me feel powerless," she whispered. "Every hallway, every office, every stairwell." She turned to him, her eyes burning. "This building? You used to live here with Marcia in the future. You walked its halls like you were king. And I sat outside. Broken." Her voice cracked. But she didn't cry. "I bought this place so that never again would I have to beg someone to let me inside." Sean stood frozen. She walked past him, stopping at the door. "This conversation is over." He moved toward her, one final plea in his throat. "Carmen, don't." He stopped. She opened the door, her voice even. "Marcia's been blacklisted. You'll find out tomorrow. I suggest you prepare." He looked at her, horror dawning. "You did that?" "No," she said. "She did that to herself. I just made sure it wasn't buried like everything else." Sean's voice was hoarse. "What happens to me now?" She didn't look back. "That depends. Can you swim?" And with that, she left him alone in the building he no longer belonged to. The news hit headlines by morning. Golden Boy CEO ousted after scandal involving fraud, misappropriation of funds, and infamous ex. Marcia Roth disappears from public eye following leaked footage and financial investigation. The building he once claimed now belongs to her, a corporate fairy tale or ruthless revenge. Carmen didn't read the full articles. She didn't need to. The world was watching now, finally seeing Sean not as the charismatic founder who turned tragedy into a brand, but as the man behind the mask, the one who built his image on bones he buried himself. By midweek, Sean's investors pulled out. His startup's board voted him out. The venture funds Marcia had funneled into side accounts came back to bite him with lawsuits from early backers. Public sentiment turned fast and vicious. What he once used to prop himself up, Carmen's pain, her disappearance, her sacrifice, was now dragging him under. And this time, she wasn't going to throw him a rope. Carmen sat in her corner office, the same one Sean had stood in days ago, sipping tea as the legal documents rolled in. Not only had her research team found ties between Marcia and 3 shell companies siphoning funds from Sean's app, but she'd also unearthed records of employees he'd underpaid and manipulated, people like her. This time, she made sure their voices were heard. Quietly, Carmen helped them file a class action suit. Quietly, she bought out every license tied to the wellness project Sean had pitched. And not so quietly, she renamed the building the Alvarez House for Women in Tech. Full rebrand, a full rebirth. Her story, not his, became the headline. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about making sure no other woman ever gave up everything for a man who couldn't even offer warmth in return. Carmen started mentoring again, offering workspace and resources for female founders. She funded scholarships in Chloe's name, the Eden's name she would one day give her daughter, the one Sean would never know, because that was her final boundary. No matter what the press speculated, no matter what Sean might hope, she would never let him into her child's life. She didn't owe him that. She didn't owe him anything. 3 months later, the building's former signage was torn down. Carmen stood beneath the scaffolding, watching it get replaced with the new emblem. Soft gold letters, clear and proud. She took a quiet breath as the crowd of press and students behind her cheered. Cameras flashed. Reporters surged forward. "Miss Alvarez," someone called. "Any comment on Sean's arrest?" She turned, smiling faintly for the cameras. "No comment on the man, but I do have one thing to say to the women watching. Don't ever let love blind you to your own worth. Don't wait for someone to rescue you. Be the one who holds the keys." And with that, she walked back inside her building. The next time she saw Sean, he was in handcuffs. It wasn't intentional. She hadn't gone there to see him. But fate, it seemed, still had its taste for irony. She was leaving a charity gala, escorted by her assistant, when a crowd formed outside the hotel entrance. Someone whispered about a high-profile arrest. Someone else pointed and said, "That's him, the CEO." And there he was, hair disheveled, eyes hollow, suit wrinkled and cheap. Surrounded by officers and drowned in camera flashes, his face twisted, with rage and humiliation as they guided him toward the car. His eyes met hers just once, just long enough. And Carmen? She didn't stop, didn't flinch, didn't blink. She kept walking, not with hate, not with malice, but with a finality that felt like justice. Months passed, the lawsuits multiplied. Marcia vanished. Rumors whispered of her fleeing the country with someone else's passport. Sean's family tried to sue Carmen for defamation. They lost. Carmen's company expanded to 2 new cities. She never gave interviews about the scandal. Never exploited the chaos for fame. She didn't need to. Her success was the loudest statement of all. One day, while organizing an alumni event, Carmen received a letter in the mail. No return address. No sender, just her name. Inside was a single photograph, an ultrasound, a real one this time, dated from months ago, and beneath it a note scrawled in uneven handwriting. "His name is not Sean's. He'll never know him. I'm sorry." Carmen read the message once, then again. She held it for a moment, and then, without another thought, she tossed it into the shredder. She wasn't interested in relics from women who had tried to survive the storm they helped create. She had no space for sympathy anymore. Only forward, motion, only peace. And she had peace now. She had a new apartment, a new name, a new life growing inside her. Every ultrasound she held to her chest, every doctor's appointment, every kick she felt, proof that Chloe had come back to her. In this life, Carmen would raise her daughter with laughter, honesty, and protection. No cold walls, no betrayal. No broken promises, and when Chloe turned 7, Carmen would hold her close and whisper the only truth that mattered. You are loved, completely, every day, by a mother who never let go. That would be the story her daughter grew up knowing, not of a man who abandoned them, but of a woman who didn't wait to be chosen because she chose herself.